All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, because I want to give our speaker plenty of time to share his wisdom with you. So, real quick, I left the video capture up the top left-hand screen, so you can kind of see what Ken is seeing. Those of you who are in the center, you're going to have to be on your best behavior. That means you, Kyle. And then those of you in the right and left on the extreme ends, you can do whatever you want because there's not picture of the video recording. Obviously, I'm really excited to have this opportunity. So before I let Ken give his official introduction, I want to go ahead and tell you a little bit about my experience and what happened. Stop that. Sorry, Ken. A couple of people off screen were waving their hands to see if they could see this.
Nice.
I started in KPMG in 2005, and Ken had already been there for about a year. He was a manager, and he was assigned as my mentor. I was very, very fortunate to have Ken as a mentor. As many jokes as you will hear us make at each other's expense, I have the highest regard in the world for Ken. He gave me some extremely great advice about how to basically operate within a Big Four environment and what it is that I needed to do to basically advance my own career path, not even just within the firm itself, but also to improve my own set of skills so that I could actually market out in other areas. We had long talks, long conversations. It was a fantastic opportunity to interact with somebody who was very knowledgeable about the way the world worked. Learned a lot from him. And just on a side note, he may or may not be responsible for me keeping my job after my first year when my big mouth opened up and said some things that I probably shouldn't have to the partner of the firm. So if he decides to share that story, then I'll go ahead and let him, because that was my reach greatly exceeding my grasp right there. And so
It was a
so
great
I'm going to
moment.
let him give official introduction about his background, and then we'll go ahead and get on to the discussion.
Hi, folks, and Michael, thank you, and thanks for those kind words. I started out my, I guess, career path back when I was probably younger than you all. I was at the University of Oklahoma. I was a freshman, and I needed to choose a path. You know, what was my major going to be? And I knew I wanted to go to law school. And Um, so I chose to be a letters major at the University of Oklahoma, which is like a classics degree on steroids. And one of the reasons I chose that is if you graduate with that degree, as they told my old roommate who didn't go to law school, here's what one of his career options was. He could have gone and worked for the circus. So you knew you weren't going to make lots of money if you graduated with a letters degree and didn't go to law school or medical school or some sort of postgraduate degree. I love that degree though, and it kind of shaped the compliance person, the risk person that I am today. I went on to law school, and out of law school, I worked for the federal government for 4 years at the Social Security Administration and got a big kind of dose of how a super huge bureaucracy works and the importance of what I call wolf pack mentality, you know, learning how to interact with people in powerful positions when you're not in a powerful position yourself. That bode me that very well for when I went into consulting, because you're often dealing with people that are at a much higher level than you are, and you need to find a way to communicate them and bridge the gap. After 4 years at the federal government, around that third year mark, the government created what was called the Compliance Guidance Document for Hospitals. The OIG for Health and Human Services created this document. And it basically said, hey, you all, if you're going to accept federal dollars as health systems and healthcare entities, we expect you to have a compliance program. And that compliance program basically followed what was in the federal sentencing guidelines that had came out a few years earlier. And the federal sentencing guidelines said, hey, if we're going to throw the book at you, we'll throw it a lot less hard if you have one of these compliance programs. So I left the government and left being a lawyer to go work at Parkland Health and Hospital System and as a compliance guy. And it was the beginning of compliance programs. That was like 25 years or so ago. And after 4 years of that, I went into consulting. I could have been a compliance officer for two hospitals, or I could have taken this consulting job. the consulting job scared the hell out of me. It was much more of a stretch for me, as Michael knows this about me, and I think Michael's the same. I am not an extrovert in my own personal life, and a lot of you might not be either, but I chose going into consulting because I knew it would force me out of my comfort zone. Um, and quite frankly, they paid me a lot more than what I was going to make as a compliance officer at the time. So in consulting, I eventually, after 2 years, I worked for a small mom and pop boutique shop who were going through a divorce, and I left them because I thought it's not a fun experience when the wife throws a stapler at her husband as they're arguing about whether or not they could get me to manage their engagement. So when it flew by my head, I said, I need to go. And what I had, and this is important for all of you all, what I had, what allowed me to have currency when I went and I interviewed PwC, E&Y, and KPMG. I sat down with them and basically said, I want a job with you. And the reason why I was cocky and arrogant like that and thought they should hire me is I had relationships in the industry. As a guy who was new to compliance at the beginning of compliance programs, I had made friends with folks all across the country when I worked at Parkland Hospital. So I had those relationships. I put them all on a 5-page Word document because I can't do Excel. And that's why I love Michael Barnes, because he could help me with Excel. And I'll touch on that kind of stuff later. So um, those relationships allowed me to say to KPMG, pay me more money, because guess what? I'll eventually monetize these relationships and I'll sell work to these people, or I'll get us access to these organizations. And I worked at KPMG for 8 years, went about 9 years, left there, went to Navigant for about 3 years, went to Crow for about 5 years, and then the last stint of my career, I worked at a big healthcare law firm called Hall Render for the last 4 years, and then I retired. I still stay active in the industry. I still have a couple of clients. I serve on Tough Medicine's board compliance committee, and I teach some classes for the Healthcare Compliance Association. So, um, Michael had said that he was lucky to be, um, I was to have me as his mentor. One of the things that Michael did that most of the other, matter of fact, none of the other like 15 or so associates or senior associates did, is he eventually came to me and said, hey, more than being my mentor, will you be my official boss? Can I report to you? And I bring that up for all of you all because when you go, and I asked before if some of you just came into the class towards the end, I asked how many of you all have had internships, and Michael said most of you all, and most of you all have worked at the Big Four. I say to folks like you all the time, you are not going to work for KPMG or PwC or Deloitte or E&Y. You're going to work most of the times for an older white male who is um, you're basically at the whim of that individual. And if the individual that you work for is a monster and has no sense for culture and integrity, well, your life is going to be fairly miserable. Michael saw that he was in a division of KPMG. We called it the forensics practice. I think they call it risk now. And Michael saw that there was not an overwhelming amount of people in leadership positions that had integrity and believed in making ethical business decisions. And Michael saw me and said, hey, I want to hook my wagon to you. Um, to me, and that's happened to me several times in my career where young people came into my office and said, hey, um, I've heard about you or I've seen you operate, and I'd like you to be my mentor or I'd like you to be my boss. And I would super stress to you all to take those leaps early on. Otherwise, you stand the possibility of floundering for that first year of your career. And if you flounder for a year, there will be some semblance of a stench that kind of like Pigpen in Charlie Brown. There will be some sort of aura, a reverse penumbra that hangs over you. And when people are putting together teams to do awesome engagements, yeah, he's like, you know what, old Joe over there, he just doesn't seem to pop. So pay attention to who you're working for and kind of search out the people that are like me, like Michael Barnes, that want to help people like you and want to kind of empower you instead of, they want to celebrate you instead of just tolerate you. Michael, is that kind of a fair intro?
That's an excellent intro. Yeah, I think it's a good lesson to hear. I think the good news is that we actually have a lot of we're very well regarded here at Truman State, and we get a lot of cross recruitment. So a lot of our students go and work for other Truman alumni, and they know the value of hard work and know the value of a good prospect, and so. The mentorship process is a little bit easier now than I think it is. That being said, I think it's still valuable in context is to develop those relationships early for sure. And that was something I was very fortunate at that for my personal development that I was able to hitch my wagon to yours as you said. So
Thanks. I mean, it's key, and like I said, I can't over stress enough that notion that you're not going to work for those big, huge companies. You're going to work for a handful of people who will basically um, either put wind behind your sails and they'll make your life, better, stronger, faster, or they will grind on you and you will have much more of a difficult kind of path to take.
a little bit of background. So I've already apprised my students a little bit about your history, but I thought maybe you could provide some context. You talked a little bit about your history in compliance and healthcare, and that was an area you specialized in even when you were at KPMG. What is it that KPMG wanted you to do when they brought you into the forensics practice, and why did they see that you were a good fit for that?
Great question. What I wanted to kind of echo the movie The Godfather when Michael says, "What I want." What I want is this before he shot the police officer that uh, sold his dad out. But what I wanted was I wanted to create a methodology. At the Big Four, everything is methodology, methodology, methodology. You have to create something that you can replicate across the country, sell and do, and teach others to do so that the organization can make money. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to create a compliance program assessment methodology and approach to go across the country and assess compliance programs for healthcare, non-healthcare. My direct focus was healthcare, and then I wanted to create a basically a data analytics engine, a tool. I called it the false claims engine that would run Medicare claims data through it. We used Tableau as a backbone, and then basically it would spit out the risk that these organizations had, false claims, the False Claims Act. It would spit out the risk they had for false claims. So what KPMG, and they paid me the most, and that's why I went there. KPMG paid me and brought me on board because they saw that I had a vision, that I was going to create something, and then I was going to maximize my relationships in the industry by selling those things that I was creating to them. I thought I understood how much they valued those relationships and how much they valued the notion that I could sell to them. I didn't fully understand it until my 13th month with KPMG, right around the time that Michael came into my world, I sold an engagement that was a 3-year engagement, and it was going to be $1.3 million per year. It was huge. I didn't realize how big that was. And the reason I'm mentioning this to you is so that you all learn earlier than I did. I had a sense that they um, respected those relationships and my potential ability to sell to them. But when I sold that engagement, it was on a Thursday. On that Friday, we were allowed to wear jeans on Fridays back then and no jacket, just a business shirt or a golf shirt as leadership, I guess. I don't know what staff, I don't know what peons like Michael used to wear on Friday, but I used to be allowed to wear a shirt and jeans. And the office managing partner's assistant called me and said, "Hey, um, Scott, the office manager, wants you to come upstairs to his personal conference room." And I said, "Oh, good Lord, is this a bad meeting or a good meeting? I have jeans on and I haven't shaven in like 3 days." She goes, "It's a good meeting." And the second in command from New York City, KPMG, as I walk in the room, this guy had a handmade suit that looked like it cost $3,000. And he was one of those typical leaders at the Big Four. He had a shockingly handsome head of hair. He was as Caucasian as they come. And he said, "Hi, Ken Zeko. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Jack," whatever the heck his name was. "And I want to say thank you for selling that $1.3 million engagement." So that's what KPMG saw in me. They saw somebody that had a vision, somebody that had relationships, and somebody who could communicate why people should buy the shit that I was selling. Is that fair, Michael?
That's a very good assessment, I think. Yeah.
And,
So,
none of that stuff, by the way, came easy to me. Like schmoozing people, building relationships. I mean, I have great friendships, but it's a small group of people. Um, None of that where I would go out, introduce myself, and then, build a network and then sell things to them. I would rather, you know, chop off my left pinky than do that, but it was the key to my success at KPMG and then for the rest of my consulting career.
So you have the distinction of being somebody who's kind of I don't want to say a jack of all trades, but definitely a jack of many trades. You've worked in healthcare compliance. You're a lawyer. You worked in forensics. I'd like to drill down a little bit and kind of your experience with that. This things that are relatable. We actually just finished talking about law and how it applies to fraud and forensic prosecution, and some of the things that I think some of our students are very interested about is talking about testimony and interrogation. And uh, I sent you some questions, and I wanted to kind of highlight some of those questions with that had to do with those topics. So, can you tell us a little bit about your experience of testifying in court and what that is a little bit like?
Yeah, it's exhilarating. It is not fun potentially. And to me, it is kind of the foundation of who I am, which is um, be prepared. It's all fun and games until someone gets poked in the eye with a stick. As a risk professionals, which you all are probably going into some semblance of a career that deals with risk and how to identify it, how to mitigate it, how to minimize it. I have a very strong kind of personal commitment to being the adult in the room. And if you're going into the risk profession, I think you should be prepared to make that commitment to being the adult in a room. And I don't ever like to be caught um, off guard. I don't ever like to be caught unprepared. And when I testified, I was so in healthcare, if a company gets in big enough trouble with the federal government, the government will say, "Hey, we'll accept your settlement, but by accepting the settlement, you hereby agree to enter a 5-year corporate integrity agreement." When someone gets a corporate integrity agreement, a CIA, they have to hire an independent review organization, a firm, a consulting firm or a law firm that basically comes in and tests to what extent that entity is complying with that 5-year corporate integrity agreement. So I was the IRO for a huge dialysis company. Um, and I also had worked with some of KPMG's leaders to insert myself. You all probably know this better than I do, but you know, in public accounting, when organizations are doing financial audits, independent, financial auditing, there's the requirement to assess fraud in the audit. And what I had said to many of the healthcare partners, who better than me to assess to what extent there's fraud in the audit? Because I understand where the risk resides at these organizations, and I have relationships with these compliance officers across the country. So what I did for this company where I was the IRO, we were also the financial auditor. So I would do basically a compliance program assessment of that organization every year. I would assess to what extent they had a effective compliance program and they were identifying and mitigating risk, and then ultimately to what extent there was a risk for fraud in the financial audit. And in one of those meetings, I told them, you all should be doing X. They told me they didn't think so. They're outside the law firm. The lawyer that represented him said, I don't think we need to. And I told them, there's no safe harbor for that in the anti-kickback statute, one of these healthcare laws. And if a whistleblower ever made the accusation that you all were doing X, you all would pay between 300 and $600 million in a settlement. The lawyer said, well, we agree to disagree. I think we could defend them. And I said, well, if I were you, I would say I would agree to defend them too if I were making $900 an hour and I had a group of young attorneys in the room staying busy for the next 2 years defending them. He was about to stab me with his Mont Blanc pen in the neck, and I wrote a memo to file, and I wrote a memo that I shared with the client. And basically, it said, I told them to do X. I told KPMG at the time, this is our get out of jail free card. Because if we didn't have that, then the allegations would have been that we were complicit. So I emailed that to myself at my home. I kept a paper copy of that with me at my house. I saved that to my hard drive. I emailed it to myself at KPMG. And 2 years later, I was a federal marshal showed up at KPMG and basically subpoenaed me to show up at court to be a witness in uh, a federal grand jury proceeding. And I said to KPMG, and KPMG lawyered up. They put me in a room with like 6 lawyers who said, what do you think our exposure is? And I said, if they have this memo, there's no exposure. We're good to go. And indeed, the government did a forensic analysis of our computer systems. They made a hard drive. They made a copy of my hard drive. They got our emails for like a 3-year period. And then they used, word search technology to find things related to that client on my email. And it was found very easy because of the way I titled it and how I had sent it to myself. And the whole reason I go in such detail is if I hadn't taken contemporaneous notes, if I hadn't created that contemporaneous memo to file, I would have not been a fact witness. I would have been a subject in that. I would have been potentially being indicted myself. So after 50 minutes of this assistant U.S. attorney grilling me and pinning my ears back and holding documents from my email system up and saying to me, read this, read this, read this. He finally tipped his hat and said, can you read this? And he showed me that document. And I went, good Lord, thank God. So I bring all of those details in to let you all know that when push comes to shove, these people that are making, 800,000 to $10 million a year, they're really good at um, not taking the blame. And if they can blame somebody who's making $90,000 a year instead of them, they will. So as you go into your meetings, be prepared to document what it is that you believe and then save those contemporaneous notes or those contemporaneous memos to file in many places so that if somebody were to do a forensic analysis, they would find them and you will be able to testify as I did in a way that was much more beneficial to me and to KPMG. And that client eventually did pay a settlement for $400 million because they didn't do what I had told them they should have done 2 years earlier.
Seems to me that's actually the best advice is just to make $10 million a year, but yeah, that may be a little bit past us right now at this point. Maybe a few years from now, we'll see.
Right.
Yeah.
You could still
Um,
do a TikTok page.
so um, a little bit about going into some detail on that. We talked a little bit about interrogation and what has been your experience with interrogation, both as kind of the interrogator and as somebody who's being interrogated as part of the process.
The being interrogated part is fairly terrifying, especially for somebody like me who likes to be prepared. I follow that old kind of stoic philosophy approach that you should only basically be concerned with the things that you can control. But I struggle with that. And when you're interrogated, you're not in control. Like when I was in that federal grand jury proceeding, I didn't have the ability to say, well, that's not a fair question, or that email is superfluous. I mean, if he wanted to focus on it, he focused on it. And then in the other defense work that I did, or expert work that I did, you're at basically under the control of the federal judge. Usually, if you're in most of my stuff was in front of federal courts. So being interrogated is terrifying for somebody that likes to create a world where he has his fingers on all of the levers. Um, that for me was terrifying. And um, if I didn't have that memo to file, then it would have been even more horrifyingly terrible. Um, I my catchphrase, my tagline, which you all could use this as well. I used to say that I get paid to be professionally skeptical. People resent that catches on. People understand what that means, and I would say to them that this one client told me, I told him that, hey doc, now I have to interview you because there was allegations they were doing something really naughty at his hospital, at his health system. And I said, I keep in mind, doc, I get paid to be professionally skeptical. So these questions might get a little tough, but I don't intend this to be an interrogation. And I think there's a big difference between an interview and an interrogation. And I think it's really important for you all to kind of grasp that going in. And the faster you grasp that, the better you'll be at this kind of black art of interviewing and interrogating. Um, that doctor, when I told him that, he said, that's great. He goes, I think it's important that you stay skeptical and not cynical. And he told me a story about that. And I would say that keep in mind, there's time where you need to pin people's ears back and you need to interrogate them. Um, I would say whether you're interviewing or interrogating, it's important to kind of get as much information about that person, their area of the company, what it is that they do, how they make money, where they generate revenue, review documents before you interview them. So if, you're interviewing like the you know, CEO of an organization, review to what their 1090, their 10K or 10Q, whatever, their public documents. Get as much information as you possibly can before you do it. Um, I would say that um, the worst interviewees, the worst people that I ever came across that conducted interviews or interrogations, they were too general in their approach. They would say, hey, what keeps you up at night? Or can you describe this? Um, I think it's best that you go in and try to learn as much about the individual and the organization as you possibly can before you start conducting those interviews or interrogations. I think that sums it up, Michael.
So yeah, good piece of note that Ken's catchphrase is "I get paid to be professionally skeptical." What's lesser known is that his daughter's catchphrase is "Be nice to your friends." So
Which she said that because she knew that I was ruthless on the senior associates and associates at KPMG, and I would tease them mercilessly. And she would say to me every day before I left the house, she would hug me and she would admonish me, and she would say, "Be nice to your friends," because she didn't want me to be mean to people like Michael Barnes.
true, true. Yeah, because I still think of Sarah as being the little girl, but she's in college now, isn't she? Yeah.
Yes, she's one of those national merit scholar freaks at the University of Oklahoma. And what's funny is when I would go to different KPMG offices, I would see post-it notes of people that I didn't know, I never had met, and there would be post-it notes on people's cubicles that would say, "Be nice to your friends."
Well, it's good advice to go around, it should be
Right.
stuck around.
Yep.
So when I think of healthcare, I think of Ken Zeko. I'll be honest, that's something that I that's so associated with. There's been a lot of news in the media lately about some of the risks that are kind of prevailing for healthcare. So, what, in your opinion, right now is kind of the biggest risk to the healthcare industry that you personally feel is something that's being underplayed or not being addressed as well as it should be?
I think the biggest risk right now to healthcare is the utter dismantling the of CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, um, and the OIG, Office of Inspector General for Health and Human Services, and the DOJ, and the various assistant U.S. attorneys who enforce the various healthcare laws, and the Office for Civil Rights who enforces HIPAA privacy. Um, I don't think the average person understands how much those organizations and the people who work there are have been already, and are continuing to be dismantled. When before the election, before the president was sworn in, I talked to several of my friends that are high up in those organizations, and I said to them, I think that it is going to be a very swift dismantling. I think within the first week of um, him being sworn in, he's going to fire countless inspector generals, especially the Office of Inspector General for Health and Human Services. And this one friend that I have that works at the federal government, she's very high up at the OIG. She said, "I disagree. I don't think it's going to happen. There's laws that say that he cannot fire an IG, an inspector general, without cause and things like that." And I said, "They're going to not follow those laws. They're going to do what they want to do." And indeed, the inspector generals were fired, like 16 of them or so were fired under cover of darkness, like at midnight on a Friday night. And the OIG the Inspector General for the Health and Human Services, OIG, was fired in that um, firing, that mass firing. And I have now three really good friends that used to work with the government or still do, but they've said to me, "Hey, how do I how do I leave? How do I get a job in industry?" And they asked me to review their um, resumes. They asked me to help them with LinkedIn. None of these government people have LinkedIn profiles, which all of you all, I imagine, do. And Michael was one of the people that taught me the value of that. Michael and a few of the other associates and senior associates one day were snickering, and it was late in the evening, like 7 o'clock. And I was like, what the hell are you guys laughing about? And they were looking at my LinkedIn account that I didn't create. My admin created it for me because KPMG said if you were a director, you needed to have one, director and above. And they showed me theirs, and it showed that LinkedIn page is a personal advertisement. It's like a billboard of how awesome you are. So make sure yours makes you look like a superstar. Um, so these government folks are saying to me, help us leave. They're on the verge of quitting. And and what I said early on in the administration was uh, these health systems, these big healthcare entities and small ones, all healthcare entities, basically, if I were an unethical CEO, I would basically um, I would be, if I were an unethical CEO and CFO, I would slash my compliance and internal audit function by 80%, and I would let it ride, and I would push the envelope because this was my contention, and it's already happened. Um, Down in Texas, there was a very high profile HIPAA privacy security case where the government had sat in a grand jury proceeding for months and months and months with these poor grand jurors taking time out of their lives to sit on this, and they came to a conclusion to indict this guy. And when the new administration came in, what I said is going to happen, and what happened in this case is the administration put huge amounts of pressure on the Houston um, Department of Justice folks and said, "Hey, you know, bygones, let this pass." And the U.S. attorney said no, and then they got rid of that U.S. attorney. They placed one of Ted Cruz's um, colleagues. He used to be Ted Cruz's general counsel for his campaign. They put him in the interim U.S. attorney position, and they said, "Hey, we're not going to go forward with that indictment." And the grand jurors were pissed because they said there was enough evidence to convict. So I think the biggest risk to healthcare and beyond, like I don't know if any of you know this, but one of the things that the administration said several months ago, a couple of months ago, whatever, it was, look, we're going to postpone enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, which that's like the backbone of compliance programs for non-healthcare entities, international corporate entities. So they could easily say, well, you know what? For 6 months, we're going to pause the False Claims Act or the Stark and anti-kickback statutes. And even if they don't, so many of my friends that work at the federal government, they're either gone, they've been fired, they've been let go, or they're about to be let go. It's a shambles. So, to what extent these laws will be enforced, and to what extent the industry will respect people like us, who are the adults in the room that are there to say to them, "Hey, guess what? I don't think you should do those naughty things." Well, it might be like, the wild, wild west over the next 3 years or so. And I know that all sounds pretty damn bleak, but it's the biggest risk that I see to not just healthcare, but to anybody that's in a risk position.
Yeah,
Damn, Michael, that sounds dark, Michael. That sounds
oh
dismal.
well, we're very familiar with dark stories. We've spent an entire semester talking about frauds. So
Uh,
yeah,
there you go.
yeah. I,
You know,
I
the
wanted
other
to kind
risk.
of
Hey,
parallel
real
that.
quick, the other risk that I would say, and for you all to kind of grasp early on, I interviewed for a job once where they wanted me bad. They told me, look, we want you, or we want to hire you, but you have to go through the interview process. And at the end of the interview process, they took me to dinner, and there was like 8 people around the dinner table, and the chair of the board. She was a super powerful lady in the state and the organ and very very powerful lady. She said, "So now that you've finished all the interviews and you know us as an organization, what do you think?" And I said, well, I think I think we could have one of the best compliance programs, if not the best compliance programs for an organization like this within the next year and a half to 2 years. And it was utter silence. And I went to the general counsel guy who I know. He and I have been friends for, at that time, 20 years. I said to him the next morning, I was like, hey, what was up with that? You don't have to be like a truth teller to understand that was awkward, that silence. And he said, we've known each other a long time. I think I owe you a solid. That was his quote. He goes, at the highest levels, I think they want a program here, not the best program. And I was so damn naive, and I had worked for the federal government, and the reason I worked for the federal government is I believed in wearing the white hat and saving the day and helping people. And when he said that, it just finally dawned on me that some of these leaders, they don't want somebody like me under their feet. They view risk professionals, they view the adult in the room as a barrier to them potentially being effective. So I didn't take that job. I said, I'm not going to sell out for, that kind of salary. But if they were going to pay me 10 million, I would have sold out like that. I would. No, so that's a big risk is some leaders they're not in it for the big win, to quote the movie.
Yeah, we've actually discussed that in a couple of scenarios. I think the most obvious parallel is Enron. When
Yeah,
regulation and compliance disappeared in California, Enron kind of basically they had a field day and did a lot of things that were really, really shady and circumspect. Do you see that becoming a possibility with healthcare companies with the drawbacks and regulation and compliance that we're starting to see?
I think it's, man, like I said, I don't want to sound too dark. Um, there's a concept, if you all haven't heard of it, called Sentinel Intelligence. By raise of hands, how many have heard of Sentinel Intelligence? Google that because it's probably what freaks like me, Michael, have. It's this ability to take massive amounts of data and run it through a very kind of empathetic filter and say, I think this is going to happen. And it usually happens. But the downside of it is this notion called the Cassandra effect, which is from Greek mythology. She had the ability to see the future, but her curse was nobody would believe her. And the sentinel intelligent person in me thinks that it's already happening, Michael. I think that these people, um, they tend to think, yay, we won. We don't have to do what others are telling us to do. We don't have to listen to the adults in the room. We don't care what the adults in the room are saying. And when, in my experience, 25 years in, risk profession, compliance profession, when you have leaders who are willing to push the envelope, like Tenet Healthcare, for example. KPMG was their external auditor. I used to assess their compliance program every year as part of the external audit process. But they pushed the envelope. They maximized revenue in an area called outliers. It was this reimbursement scheme Literally, the rest of the health systems in America saw this gray area and said, "Ooh, I don't think we can maximize revenue there. That seems, if not illegal, it's bad, it's naughty, it's not good, it's not right." Tenant, allegedly at the time, they signed a corporate integrity agreement and paid like $900 million for this. Their leadership said, "You know what? It's gray. We're going to maximize the heck out of it." And they made cajillions off of it. But the problem was that the government said is the compliance officer at Tenet was also their general counsel. And the government said that there was that guy, Chuck Grassley, who's still in power. He's from Iowa. He said, "You don't have to be a pig farmer from Iowa to smell the stench of conflict between compliance and legal." Compliance should say this is what an organization should do. Legal basically should say this is what an organization can do, can get away with. And Tenet pushed the envelope and maximized revenue in that area. The government eventually found out about it and said you shouldn't have done that. And they filed, somebody blew the whistle on them and made lots of money. So I think it's happening. I think it's going to be wild, wild west for the next several years, maybe more. And it's definitely concerns me.
All right, so we got the dark stuff out of the way early. I figured I'd
Yes,
go
sir.
ahead and open this up. So I'm going to let the students ask their own questions, but I'm going to kind of preface this question so that we can get the mood in the right place. What's one of your favorite stories from when you were working at KPMG?
You touched on it. There were two. There were two, and they happened right around the same time. So, Michael, um, I've said to people, I've worked with brilliant people throughout my career. I don't know that I've worked with one that was more brilliant than your professor. So, at least you got that going for you, which is nice. So, the when what he alluded to earlier, so KPMG used to say, "Hey, we hire the best and the brightest," and then we would do our annual evaluations. And somebody like me as a leader, I would say be over 8 people. Well, I couldn't give all 8 of them, say 1 to 10. KPMG's process was much more laborious than this. But, and you all need to know this, none of these places have an easy employee evaluation process. And ultimately, it's just like a big round circle, a table where you just go around and you say, "What do you think about Jane? And what do you think about Joe?" And the reason why you should attach yourselves to somebody that's knowledgeable is ultimately when you're going around the round table, everybody wants to protect the people that they love and the people that are they think are awesome. But the minute there's like a crack in the armor, the minute that somebody is like the one that's tainted, like I said earlier, like Pigpen, um, when you're going around the round table and leaders are going around the round table and they only can give out a certain amount of high number ones or number twos, they want those number ones or twos for their people. So if there's Jane over there that's like Pigpen, when they're going around the round table, they'll be like, "Oh, you know what? Joe, he's the best, and Nancy, she's the best. You know who's not the best? Jane." And they throw her under the bus so that they could rise their people up. So one of the most incredible stories I ever saw, or things I ever witnessed, was we had this big, huge Dallas-wide meeting, and they were talking about our employee evaluation process. And Barnes, Mr. Professor Barnes, the good Dr. Barnes, stands up and says, "Hey, I have a question. If we hire the best and the brightest, and the forensic practice is supposed to be the best and the brightest of KPMG, how is it that we don't have a larger percentage of number ones and number twos in our practice? How is it that you cap the number ones and number twos? You falsely say we could only have one number one and maybe 2 number twos in our practice. You do a bell curve." And it was like leadership, they glitched. They went, "Oh shit, this 20-something-year-old kid just poked a hole in our whole employee evaluation process." And one of them stood up like a schmuck and tried to debate Michael from like a statistics perspective. And Michael was like, that's not how it works. Statistically, there should be this, or whatever. So just know as you go into these organizations, at the end of the year, they're going to do an evaluation. They're going to make you do your own personal evaluation. I just told my wife that she's a special ed teacher and she's the nicest person I know. She never beats her own chest. Know that you're going to be asked to evaluate yourself. I told my wife last night, put the burden on them. Evaluate yourself the highest you can, and then make them knock you down. Don't you knock yourself down. Don't you make it easier for them to not give you a number one or a number two, but put the work in to make sure that you're a number one and number two. Just know that they're capped on the amount of number ones and number twos that you could do. And then the last thing that I did that was, I thought, heroic and awesome is they wanted us to implement a new software system where we would put our it was a networking system where you would put the people who you know, your relationships in the industry in there. You would load them. And every time you talked to them or emailed them or texted them, you had to enter it in there so you could track what you were doing to sell work. And KPMG said, hey, do this at the end of the day. It's just one more thing to do. It'll only take a few minutes. And I stood up and said, hey, in law school, they told us about interstate commerce that there's this famous case. And if you allow every, mom and pop farmer to sell a bushel of wheat on the side of their, street, that can flood interstate commerce and cause the wheat market to collapse. KPMG, if you're telling us to do one thing on Monday extra and it's just a few minutes, and on Wednesday you go, hey, I got one more thing you need to do, just take a few minutes. Well, if you ask us to do a few minutes here, a few minutes there, a few minutes there, I'm not good at math, but I'm good at numbers. That's going to add up. And eventually we're going to be working 16-hour days. And that's no sweat to you, KPMG, because you pay us a salary. You don't pay us hourly. So I'm inclined to not do what you're asking me to do unless you give me something for it. And they said, what do you think that should be? And I said, as a good consultant, I think you should give me like $1,000 gift card every time I do that. And KPMG came up with a award system that said if you do it to a certain extent, you get $1,000 gift card. And I made like $9,000 off of the stupid thing. So you're going to be asked to do all of these things. I say, be your biggest advocate. Find somebody like me who will advocate for you around the big table, and don't be afraid to speak as long as you have the hard work to back it.
Any questions? I got plenty of questions. I just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. So early on, you were talking a little bit about mentorship, and I think that's a valuable concept, especially for these students who are going to go out from the real world. So I want to phrase a kind of a two-part question for you. So first of all, with the students who are going to become graduates and we're going to go to the workforce, what is it that they should look for in a potential mentor? And then 5 years down the line, when they're actually in the position to become mentors, what is it, the qualities that you think a good mentor should have?
Awesome. I would look for somebody who seems kind, somebody that seems to understand the organization, somebody that people talk highly about, somebody that you feel that you connect with. What's weird is I say this all the time. I've never really had a mentor. I've asked and I've been shot down a couple of times. So I would search for those people, somebody that seems kind, somebody um, that believes that, you know, somebody that's a superstar in the area of their, so like if you're, you know, if you're going into like there was a guy at Crow when I was at the consulting firm, accounting firm Crow. This guy came into my office and said, hey, I've asked around, I want to get into healthcare, and people say that you're like the czar of healthcare here. I'd like to go to lunch with you. And I said to him, hey, why did you later on? I said, why did you come into my office that day? And he said, I thought you would be the fastest way for me to make it my job better at this place. He was miserable. So I would look for somebody that's seems to be kind, someone that seems to be tied into the organization, someone that's maybe on the podium speaking nationally. Like I believe that I should be the tip of the spear, bringing the industry, telling the industry where they need to go. Um, Somebody that has communication skills who could sit around that round table and tell the world why your stuff doesn't stink, why you should be a superstar, someone that can advocate on your behalf. Um, and equally, what I think that you all should do as mentors, and I would say the mentor doesn't have to be in the area that you're going into. Like, if I tell my son, and this is where you all might be hamstrung somewhat compared to like when me and Michael worked at the Big Four. My son works for Lockheed Martin, and he makes a lot of money as a 26-year-old kid, and he works from home only, and they have a no camera policy, so they don't even turn their cameras on Zoom calls. So he doesn't even know what these people look like that he would work with. He's been there 2 years. But my son is he's like a god. He's like 6'5", 220 pounds. When he comes into a room, he just has this aura about him. He's a real good communicator for a STEM guy, a tech guy. He's a computer engineer. Um, so he's losing out because he's not in the building with these leaders. They don't see him coming and going. He can't say, hey, guy who's making $1.2 million a year, you want to go to lunch with me? So make sure that you find a way to um, build these relationships with these people that are in positions of power. And like I said, they don't have to be in your division. You can find somebody that just seems to be a rock star and say to them, hey, can you be a potential mentor? The other thing is, if you're going to consulting, what I always told the young people at KPMG and Crow, you're going to do engagements for these large entities usually. Build relationships with them. If you, for some reason, like one thing that's interesting, when Michael and I work together, um, I would take 23 to 28-year-old kids with me to go interview the CEO of a company where the CEO was. I remember one time I was assessing fraud in the audit for non-healthcare entities and was interviewing the CEO of an oil and gas company. And the dude had made $32 million the year before he sat down and met with me. And I had some 20-something-year-old kid with me. And I was thinking, why is this man even listening to me? He made $32 million the year before. So find, if you're at organizations doing work as a consultant and you do get in an area and you do start to have some semblance of a relationship with somebody at that organization, build that relationship after the engagement. Stay in touch with them. Find reasons. Google this. I call it's called pebbling, and it's what, if you haven't ever heard of it, penguins do this. They mate for life, and they give each other pebbles to show that they care for each other, the two penguins. Well, I call it pebbling in human ways. What you do is, if you're on an engagement and you're working with the vice president of whatever, well, and that person went to Texas A&M, which I hate, but they all love Texas A&M. And you see an article about Texas A&M. Hey, I saw this article about Texas A&M. I thought you might be interesting. That's called pebbling. Pebble the shit out of the world. Tell the world, hey, you know what? I saw this and I thought you might be interested in it, and build those relationships, and don't be afraid to ask for mentors outside of your organization, mentors at these client shops where you do work, because ultimately you might be able to make the leap outside. You want as many possible employment avenues as you can, And yes, you might go work at a big four and you might end up being a partner in 10 years and you might love it and it might just be, all that you ever wished for. But you also might be hired after 2 years by the one company that loved you the most and they might pay you freaking $400,000 a year as a 29-year-old kid. You don't know. Build those relationships and find mentors wherever they seem to be kind, they could communicate, they're passionate, and they believe in helping younger people and do that for them when you're down the road 5 years or so.
I want everybody to know that that was actually really great advice about pebbling, but keep in mind that this is not literally pebbling. If I find rocks in my mailbox upstairs, I'm gonna be really pissed off. Okay.
And that's what you would have done to me. And that's why my daughter always said, be nice to your friends, because you would have done that. And then I would have
Oh yeah.
gone
Well,
to
yeah,
eight.
just as a reminiscence, so back in the late 2000 aughts, you were widely acknowledged as the most interesting man at KPMG. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there was that beer commercial where the guy would say, I don't often drink beer, but when I do, I drink Dos Equis. And he was the most interesting man in the world. Well, these younger folks started to say I was the most interesting man at KPMG. And Michael made a Facebook account. And I didn't have Facebook and don't believe in Facebook and still don't have it. And he made a freaking Facebook account for me as the most interesting man in consulting. And he took a bunch of pictures of me and he used whatever audited skill photoshopping and he photoshopped me in all these freaking things showing me as the most interesting man in consulting. And it took off so much that I was introduced as the most interesting man in consulting at a conference once. And I was like, oh, good Lord. But that day that Michael made that Facebook page for me about me, I told him that he had gone too far and that if he didn't change it, I was going to walk him personally to HR and I was going to have him fired from KPMG.
That was the most serious I'd ever seen Ken, actually.
That was, and I look back at that and go, man, I was such a dork. It was funny. You know what? My daughter, who said you better be nice to your friends, um, she came up with a slogan for me. She says to me fairly often that it was funny but not appropriate. And Michael, that was funny but not appropriate.
It's amazing. It's amazing how many things I did while I was at KPMG that actually that moniker could be applicable to.
Yeah, he used to. This is back when people didn't know, and I still think people don't know this. You could go into Word and you could do a thing where you change. You could tell it, for the whenever somebody types the word the, type this instead. And he would go into when they didn't lock their computers, he would go into their computers and he would do that. And then all of a sudden, people would see these words popping up on their screen and they didn't know why. I just thought that was very, very funny, but again, probably not appropriate.
Eric Bowman didn't think it was very funny, but
No,
yeah.
he didn't. I did.
So some of the best advice you gave me, Ken, when we were working together at KPMG is to concentrate on things that are going to be value added that are go beyond just what other people can offer. So, focus on your strengths. What do you think are some things in this day and age that this generation can do to develop their strengths within the workplace that they can basically be seen as a cut above the rest?
That advice that I gave Michael, I've given to all my mentees for the last, 18 years or so. And the ones that took that advice, and I would tell you this, never be a never be the type of person that asks for and gets advice and then just sits on it like a bump on the log. I despise time sinks, people that you invest in and it goes nowhere. They don't do anything with it. So when they do give it, even if you have to make it like you appreciate it more than you actually do, make it that person who's taking time. Every time I sat down with young people and spent 2 hours with this person, an hour with that person, 30 minutes with that, that was time out of my life and my family's life. I could have gone home, an hour and a half earlier that day. I would have to work that hour and a half on my own time. So whoever's mentoring you, when they take time to mentor you, they're taking time out of their work. They could be doing work, but they're investing in you. So make sure that when they do invest in you, you let them know how much you appreciate it and you take it and run with it. And my biggest piece of advice for the young people was find that area of the engagement, find that area of the thing that the group is working on that's freaking hard and miserable and nobody likes to do it. It's not flashy, it's not sexy, and master that. So for this one guy at Crow, I said to him, I suck at Excel. I need an Excel god to help me create a budgeting worksheet, a budgeting tool that I could put tasks in it, the tasks down the left side, employees above on the top, and then we put hours, and then there's a table that has the hourly rates for each individual, and it all calculates. For me, I could see it. I couldn't create that. This kid put it all together in a massive, awesome spreadsheet. Do that kind of stuff. Take the misery out of the boss who's over you. If you could take some of the misery off your boss's plate, like Michael, I knew that he got really good at what was that program that
His
language?
idea,
What was it?
idea.
Idea. I knew he was really good at it. I didn't understand it, but I knew that it was key. And I knew that he could do something super fast. It's kind of like that old John Henry story, the him fighting, him racing against the steam engine and whether the human's faster than the steam engine, whatever. I knew Michael could do things faster than the average Jane or Joe with his idea capabilities. I knew he wasn't super healthcare focused. He was more general. I said to him, "Hey, Michael, could you use your idea wizardry to take this one piece of this engagement and crunch it? Because it was taking the one lady that did this for me like 2 weeks to do it." And I showed Michael what it was, and he wasn't. Again, you have to have this leap of faith. You have to be confident enough in your ability to say, yeah, partner Joe, partner Jane, whatever, I could give that a shot. And he did. And he was able to do what this lady was doing in like 2 weeks' time in like 4 hours, Michael.
That sounds about all right. Yeah.
Yeah. So he took this new technology, this new skill, and he cut something like 70 hours out of my budget, which I then told the client, oh, guess what? We got a rock star. We're saving you this much dollars. I told him, I showed him how much money that action was saving. And it was also more reliable because there was less human input in it. So for you all, what I would say at this point in my career is master the hell out of AI. Be somebody who knows how to prompt ChatGPT excellently. Be somebody who's got like a personal relationship with ChatGPT so that you can say, hey, if you're asked to do something, I do it on I never did AI on my work computer. And companies have different policies about it. But I would, even recently, when I was employed at the law firm, I would run ChatGPT, I would query it, I would prompt it on my home computer, and then I would use it to create a draft, or I would use it to check to see if I was missing stuff, even though I was quote unquote a god in the industry and I knew my stuff. And I would say, hey, I'm about to do this, give me the steps that you think that I should do before I go conduct this investigation into this, specific law issue. So if you all could be super users in artificial intelligence, super users in Excel, um, super users in PowerPoint, because people like me, if I got asked to do an engagement, I'm going to need to eventually put that work that we all did into some sort of format, Word or PowerPoint. I pushed my clients towards PowerPoint because it's a little easier than doing like a 100-page Word document. So if you all could step in the boss person's office and say, hey, if you need any help with that, I'm pretty strong at PowerPoint and I could help you with that. And then the last piece of advice that I would give you all on that front is every time you step in leadership's office, every time you step in their realm, if you go to lunch with them, especially if they're old school, if they're older, they're like me, 50 years and above, bring a freaking notepad or make sure they know that you're adept at taking notes on your phone, or bring your computer and tell them, hey, I really like taking notes on my computer, so I'm going to bring my computer so I could take notes. Because your ability to say to them, if they say, what I really want to be able to do is I really want to be able to take this idea and create this with it, and your ability to just go and get started. If they have multiple projects they're working on, they have multiple teams that they're supervising, and somebody like you says, hey, I could help you get started and I can make the misery of getting started easier, that's extremely valuable to somebody like you and somebody like those partners or directors.
Well, Ken, it is always a pleasure talking to you. I'm glad that I got to at least have one generation of my students talk to you. Maybe this will be something we can do again next year, but let's go ahead and give our speaker a round of applause.
And thank you, Michael. And Michael, you could give them my contact information. My cell phone and my email. Um, I would say build those relationships as you graduate, keep each other in touch. And wherever you go, don't forget the power of building a network. My kids hate it when I tell them that, but reach out to the people that are in powerful positions over you and basically empower them to help you be better, stronger, faster. They'll do it. All of the big four are very strong proponents of mentoring. So if you ask and you hold your mentor accountable, they'll help you be better, faster, stronger. And in return, they'll get better employees for it.
All right, guys. Well, that does it. Thanks again to Ken, and we're going to call it good here. I'm going to stop the recording.